Growing up, I was like most little girls. I dreamed of a fairy tale, happy ever after, once upon a time dream where my Prince Charming would come and sweep me off my feet and love me forever. That was my only example of love growing up, was the Disney movies and the fairy tales. But in reality, my world was full of brokenness and dysfunctional relationships. In fact, I come from an adulterous relationship. I grew up in a single parent home, like 23% of American children do. I come from a family line of women who have experienced toxic and abusive relationships. Specifically, my mother has had her share of unhealthy, toxic love. For example, my father, who was a married man with an entire family she was initially unaware of. And in the stories I heard about my siblings' father and the men in general were just unhealthy and toxic. But in spite of it all, I desired something different. I desired true love. I desired unconditional love. But the problem was I had no idea how to get it. May 2013 is when I met my ex-husband. I was a new Christian at the time, and I was super zealous and on fire for God. And I was at a place in my life where I was trying to discover who I am, discover my purpose, and just really find my place in the world. It was actually at a prayer service that day, and he spotted me. And through a mutual friend and my then pastor, we were connected. I thought this man was my Prince Charming, right? He came out of nowhere and almost seemed like a godsend. And I went back on my commitment because I said that I was not going to date for a while because I was in the process of finding myself. But because of who he was and the relationship with my then pastor, I thought I can trust him. And so I did let my guards down, and things began to move very, very quickly. But in that time, he was love bombing me. He was taking me out, showing me attention and affirmation and just saying everything that I wanted to hear because of my lack of self-love that I had. But things moved very, very quickly. I fell in love, and so did he, so I thought. But things moved very, very quickly. 2 months into our dating relationship, he proposed and we were engaged. 1 month after that, we were married. There was only one problem. No one could know about us. We kept the marriage private because of his religious beliefs, and he was a pastor. And it was about a year before we came out publicly. And in the beginning, it was good. When the relationship was behind closed doors. As we began to minister together and pastors church together, and I got pregnant with my daughter, is when I started to notice the shift in the relationship. It was solely about him, and I was becoming very drained, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I was working 12-hour days. I was also helping support this ministry and his business. And when it came to things that I desired, my dreams, my passions, all of that was on the back burner. And I was emotionally dying and unfulfilled and unhappy. And specifically one day, I do remember going to my ex-husband to try to work things out. I'm sitting in the car with my husband, and I was trying to talk to him about just how I felt and what I was dealing with. I was trying to come to him, and I actually had a plan with how we can better manage our home. And he said no to my plan. And at that time, it was the first time I actually had an anxiety attack in the car. And I couldn't breathe. I was hyperventilating. And he had no empathy. He just looked at me. He didn't comfort me as his wife. And from there, nothing really changed. And it was about 2 years of that. And I was just tired, physically drained, and unfulfilled. I was not pursuing my own personal passion and calling. It was summer 2017 when things really started to shift, and things went from kind of covert abuse to more overt and aggressive. And so, summer 2017, it was June, we bought a $225,000 home. August, we went on our 4th year anniversary, and September, we celebrated our daughter's 2nd birthday. And about a week after that, he came to me wanting to leave the relationship. And it didn't make sense, because at that time, my perception of the relationship and our problems was that it was normal marital issues. But he had a different perspective, and he wanted out, and it was aggressive. One time I actually remember coming home, because he started to, leave a lot, but he did pick up my daughter from daycare. And so we had this unwritten rule, whoever had her, I was like, you can leave me, but you can't leave our daughter. So whoever had her stayed in the house. And so this particular day I came home, he was pressuring me about signing the papers. And I, at this time, was still exploring my things legally and talking to lawyers, and I didn't sign them. I didn't quite know what to do. He, took the sheets off the bed so I couldn't sleep in the bed, took the remote from me so I couldn't watch the TV. I had a work meeting that evening. He turned the music up really loud, and it was disruptive. And I was, telling him, to turn off the music so I can have the call. He was like, this is my house, I can do what I want. And it became a thing over the speaker, because it was my speaker that I was paying for on my Sprint through our cell phone bill. And long story short, he ended up taking the speaker outside. I did go after him, and he smashed the speaker in the driveway, and I muffed him in his face. I open palm. At that point, I called the police. I did have my mother on the phone. She told me to call the police, and I did. The police came and running our names. And, at that time, I learned that he had domestic violence on his record from his first marriage. And he ended up leaving. But he came back, and I went in the house. He came back, and he had a scratch on his face that I know I did not do, and pressed charges on me, and I was arrested in front of my daughter. But I had a lot of, favor with that officer and the police department, because they saw through the situation. The officer actually told me, he's like, that man does not love you. He tried to convince him not to press charges on me. And he, they gave me legal advice and let me use my phone and in the jail cell and everything, just because they saw through it. But, he had to arrest me even though he didn't want to, which was actually his words. And when we got back home, he actually told me that was to punish me or to teach me a lesson. And I remember, when I was being arrested by the officer, he showed me a lot of favor, the officer did. He was telling me how that man, his words were, that man does not love you. And he actually called him a snake because he read through the situation. And I couldn't agree more at that moment when I was hearing from my ex-husband at the time that this was to punish me. The first time I heard about narcissistic abuse was through a friend of mine who works in social services. She's a social worker, and she sent me an article about narcissism as she heard and observed my marriage. She sent me an article that it was maybe 10 signs that you're dating or married to a narcissist. And so I read that, and my ex-husband was literally everything on that list. The second time I heard about narcissism was after counseling, when I encouraged my ex-husband and I to go to counseling before getting divorced. After that session, I spoke with the counselor one-on-one and via text message, and I actually went back to her, and she said the same thing, that he might be a narcissist. And so I didn't really know what that meant at the time, but I do know now that 158 million people are affected by narcissistic abuse in the United States. My healing journey, however, started off rough. Even though I had great intentions and I I was not trying to allow this to affect my relationship with God and trust in people, but it did. And I found myself depressed and lonely. We were co-parenting, and so, there would be whole weeks where I was by myself. And so my drug of choice back then was relationships and men. I fell into old patterns, and I ended up finding myself in 2 more toxic situations that actually were worse than my marriage. They were more overt. One of them actually became a stalker. And so after that point, I decided that I needed to get serious about this. And I realized there was something deeply going wrong internally with me, because I was attracting these toxic relationships and toxic men into my life. And so I started to get serious about my healing journey. And I went to, prior to that, I did attempt going to, therapy. I went to cognitive, talk therapy, which was beneficial. It was, venting. And I also went through, ministry and church. I experienced prayer and deliverance ministry, but there were still things going on internally that I needed to deal with and process. And so at the end of 2019, I found a counselor or therapist who was an expert in trauma therapy and attachment. Taking my healing journey serious and doing my work, what I did was break the cycle. I broke the generational pattern and cycle of toxic and emotional abusive relationships that my mother experienced and other women in my family. And I now broke the cycle so my daughter does not have to experience what I've experienced, and she can now see what healthy love looks like through my healthy dating relationship. And also, I can teach her what self-love is and teach her healthy boundaries with men and help her understand her worth and value as a woman. And this has become a passion for me. And I'm now helping other women break the cycle. So this year I started a podcast called My Love Life.
It's your girl, Aleida Lynn here, your soul prosperity coach. And I'm excited that you guys are here for episode 5 of My Love Life Rebranded,
where I'm interviewing women who have been through toxic situations and toxic relationships, but also who they now have expertise to help women heal and grow and understand and break the cycle of toxic and abusive relationships. And just so they can become their best selves, become the woman that they were always predestined and created to be. And I'm also working on a book called The Second Bride, which God gave me back in 2014 while I was still married. I remember that night he woke me up loud and clear, and I heard it and I wrote it down. And I didn't know what the title of the book meant at that time. But since then, after living out this story, I know that it's to help women find love after abuse, love after divorce. And love, again, is self-love, it's God's love, and it's also romantic love. Now my love life has been rebranded, and that's because I'm experiencing self-love and I'm loving myself and I'm enjoying life and I'm doing the things that I'm passionate about, and also attracting and experiencing real healthy love.